Good morning, all. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I'm your host, John McGinley. I'm joined by Ryan McGinley again today. We're here to chat through all the latest Celtic news. There's a wee bit to talk about, Ryan. There's been a few updates since we were last on air. We didn't quite make it onto YouTube yesterday, but we were busy with some other stuff around the site and around our work. We met up in person yesterday, though, Ryan, so it was good to see you then.
Yeah, but some people would maybe say it's a family reunion for the two of us being McGinleys, but very different surnames. EY for you, AY for me. But no, it was nice to meet up in person, chat about what we're expecting to do next season, and also talk about Celtic, because I think that's what we both enjoy doing. Enjoy talking about Celtic, gabbing about Celtic, and what to expect in the transfer window and beyond.
Yeah, first of all, before we get into the rest of our chat, good morning to everyone in the live chat. It's good to see everyone. And word from our sponsor, Seneca Medical Group, #1 hair transplantation clinic in the UK. They've got clinics in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Aberdeen. They're going to be our sponsors for the current season, so thanks to them. Now, Ryan, there's been a bit of an update. It seemed to have all gone a little bit quiet on the transfer front over the last few days. I think that was just after there was a rush of news when I was off last week. We won't labour the point too much on some of the transfer news around, but the big step forward that seems to have been taken over the last 24 hours is that Celtic have agreed a fee for Benjamin Nygren after also agreeing personal terms with them. So that looks like it's, after a little bit of a period of silence, that one's moving forward now.
Yeah, absolutely. And people were worried when I put out a status late last night saying barring any hitches or if this transpires. I just want to reiterate that I think that this move will happen. It's just I want to keep it as calm as possible, because we've seen Celtic in the transfer window before. You don't want to get too excited over a player until he's got that scarf above his head, until he's signed the contract and he's having an interview with Celtic TV. But this one looks to be pretty far down the line. I think Celtic. The original link was just over a week ago. I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday last week. Since then, there's been nothing but positives coming out of this potential deal in terms of negotiations, personal terms, talks between the clubs. So I think there's an understanding and an acceptance almost from the Nordsjælland side of things that they're going to lose their player. And if they're going to lose him just now, they'd rather get him for a fee rather than losing him for free 6 months on. So he seems to have chosen Celtic over the likes of Anderlecht and Copenhagen, maybe some other MLS clubs in there that have previously been unnamed. But it looks as if he's going to get his move to Celtic that he's been desiring. By all accounts, are really exciting. Young player that can still develop, only 23 years old. Yeah, a really exciting transfer by the looks of it.
I've got a couple of points coming in here. One just fired in straight away from Tam PTV, who says, let me pull it up. Morning, guys. An interesting note is that Nygren's 3 stats for Sweden. I've seen him play up front. Add that to him playing most of his club football on the wing. The versatility is great to see. I believe he also has experience in a kind of number 10 midfield role, a kind of creative role as well. That versatility is crucial, I think, in Rodgers' system, especially going into the new season. I think Rodgers will want players who can play in a variety of positions. I think it is. I might be wrong in saying, Ryan, but I believe his strength is on the wing, though. That's where he's played the majority of his football. But having that kind of, as I say, versatility is always positive.
Yeah, from looking at the positions that he's played the most in his career, it would the right wing would stand out. To be honest, that's the position that he's played for the majority. But he can play across those 4 positions, whether that be right wing, left wing, attacking midfield, or through the middle as a striker. I think that versatility can only help Celtic and help the player get game time in the long run. Rodgers likes a player that's versatile. Look at Daizen Maeda; he can play in the left as well as through the middle. Can also play in the right on occasion. If he can play in 4 positions, he'll make it very difficult for him to stay out of the team, because due to form, due to injuries, there'll always be players moving in and out of the squad throughout the season. I think he can make a right nuisance of himself in the right possible way, and be in that team regardless of where he's put. If he's strong and capable in 3 or 4 of those areas, then it means that Brendan Rodgers can potentially rely on him in those for whatever. And if he makes himself expendable like that, then there's no problems with that whatsoever. I'm quite happy with that versatility that he's shown previously in his career, and hopefully can do that at Celtic.
One of the other bits of news that came out over the last 24 hours, but Bisha seems to want this move to Celtic. That was the word coming out of Belgium yesterday. Talks ongoing between Celtic for him. What's the kind of latest on that before we move on to other topics?
Yeah, so Sasha Tavolieri, who's been front and centre of this move in terms of given the latest on Balikwisha's Willie Wonte saga to Celtic that seems to have been going on for 2 summers now, or last summer and this summer. Hopefully it'll get done quicker than August, which was when it was getting reported last time around. But he tweeted late yesterday, that talks between Celtic FC and Michel Ange Balikwisha are still ongoing, still underway. The left winger is keen on the move. We knew that he was keen on joining Celtic. He's made it publicly known that he wanted that move to a European club back in, I think it was March or April time, before injuries scuppered his move both in last summer and in the winter, because he got 2 separate injuries that really hampered his progress last season. I think Celtic now, as much as you don't want to like them to a player too much because you don't know how truthful it is, the fact that his name has popped up on 3 different transfer windows would suggest that either people are making it up or that it is legit. Celtic do want this player in. The fact that Tivoli 250 on Twitter, the fact that he's got that means that I would say there's some legitimacy behind those rumours. So fingers crossed, if Celtic are interested in him, they can get him through the door as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I think there seems to be an element of that Celtic might be moving a little bit quicker this summer than they did last year, which is positive, of course. I think that's also just that in terms of Nygren, it just his availability seems to be a bit freer this year. Like, I don't think the player wants to wait until late summer to kind of find his new club, and so that obviously suits Celtic as well. I see a bit of chat in the live chat. Did Celtic taking too long to get this one over the line? No, I mean I think a week is pretty normal in transfer terms, and I believe that the Nordsjælland were happy for Nygren to kind of agree his next move elsewhere and kind of give him the choice of where he's going to move to, and then agree the fee with the club after kind of personal terms had been concluded. So I think that's why it's moved on the club side of things. This hasn't been a case of Celtic approach a club, agree a fee, and then talk to the player. I think it's all kind of been done in tandem. So I think taking a week or so for that there's no problem for that with me at all. Are you expecting Celtic to now just push on from here, or is there going to be, everyone wants to see players in for pre-season. I think if we can get 2 or 3 teams in for that first pre-season date, that's going to calm everyone down and give everyone the kind of, it'll be perceived as Celtic taking care of business, basically.
Yeah, I think the most important date for me is that you can get these players in before the warm training camp in Portugal, because I think that's going to be so important, both for fitness and for them getting to know their new teammates, especially in a warm condition, being abroad, can connect with them, can maybe do some activities out with the football pitch as well. That's obviously the positive of having these things not during COVID. They'll be able to go out and do things together, and I think that's important for squad bonding. Playing against a couple of teams, especially Sporting Club over there, will be a good test in the Algarve Stadium. That'll be a good test for Celtic. So you're hoping that Celtic can bring as many of these new recruits in before then, potentially to come back and play against Newcastle in that home game. I think the Newcastle game is a great place to showcase the new signings that are already through the door. Kieran Tierney will no doubt play against Newcastle, and you would hope that there's going to be some others. I mean, by the way that the Benjamin Nygren story is developing, you'd be a little surprised if he wasn't a Celtic player by the time Newcastle and Sporting Club game. You would say, barring any late hitches, that this deal is potentially done. So I would want him in as soon as possible, potentially playing against Cork on the 8th of July. And let's get a good look at him and see if he can affect the first team straight away.
Dan Tinney asking us, is the Champions League tomorrow? I think that's in relation to some of the qualifying draws that have taken place this week with the other Scottish clubs who are in Europe this year. I think there was draws for Rangers and Hibs. Celtic's Champions League draw isn't until early August. It's not until August 4th. So Celtic will be waiting until that time to find out who they will be playing in that playoff draw. Celtic only have one qualifying playoff round to make it into the league phase, and those matches don't take place until mid-August. So as I say, there'll be qualifying rounds in the Champions League until that point, and Celtic's draw will be on August 4th. what's happening tomorrow is that the Scottish Premiership fixtures are being announced, Ryan, and that will give us an indication of Celtic's schedule going well into the new year. We'll find out all the matches that take place after European rounds, etc. We'll find out the first derby dates of the season, so that there'll be interest in that, obviously.
Yeah, and it all makes it real, to be honest, because right now you're at the end of the season. The end of the season is only a couple of weeks ago, but yet when you hear the fixtures, then the countdown is on till the new season. I know that Celtic are already prepping for that by bringing in signings. They'll have a qualifier to negotiate after the first couple of those league games, because it'll be at the middle to the end of August for the first and second leg respectively. Yeah, as much as it's a nice break, it's not a long break when you think about it. In terms of when comparing to other sports, if you watch American sports, for example, the NFL, the NBA, they'll get 4, 5, 6 months off. For Celtic, it's only a couple of months, and then they're back into competitive games, never mind pre-season games. So it never really stops for the players. I think it'll be exciting to see who Celtic play first, who they play on Trophy Day. You would expect Celtic maybe to be at home first, although you don't want to predict too many things. There might be an away game and then they do the home game after, but regardless of that, it'll be exciting to see who Celtic play, when they play Rangers, when they play the likes of Falkirk and Livingston, the newcomers to the Scottish Premiership. So plenty of intrigue, not just for Celtic but for the rest of the league, concerning how the domestic season will pan out fixture wise.
It allows people to plan ahead, of course, as well, especially
Absolutely.
people coming over from Ireland and the like. So yeah, fixture day is also always a decent day.
Trophy day, sorry, Flag Day.
Flag Day, yeah. We've got a question from Rag McNair here, which is good because it's a good segue to what I was wanting to talk about anyway today. He asks, question for you, should Brendan go back to a 4-2-3-1 with Engels and Callum in the pivot and Nygren at 10? So the reason why this is relevant today and relevant to the video title is I wanted to talk a bit about Kieran Tierney coming back to the club, the kind of tactical impact his style of fullback play will have on Celtic. There was an interesting article that went up on celticway.co.uk yesterday from Alan Morrison, who posited that Tierney's obviously a very different fullback in style of Greg Taylor. Greg Taylor looks to be on his way out of the club. Kieran Tierney's overlapping fullback style will have knock-on effects on the Celtic midfield, on the Celtic attack, even on the opposite flank. And Alan's point was that when Tierney's first spell at Celtic, when he was first coming into the team, he was a rampaging, forward-thinking fullback, and the way that the balance of the team worked in that respect was that Scott Brown was kind of situated on the kind of right deep side of midfield, and Mikael Lustig often tucked in and played a more defensive role as a fullback. Fast forward to now, when you look at the other side of the team now, Alistair Johnston is also a very similar fullback, I would suggest, to Kieran Tierney in terms of that overlapping run, and had a very fruitful partnership with Nicholas Kuhn over the course of the season. So Tierney's return, it does throw up some interesting questions about what changes we might see to Celtic's tactical setup next year. Is he going to just give Tierney free licence on that left wing? What does that mean for the midfield? Does it mean we then start to need a more central creative talent such as Nygren in a kind of more number 10 position? Interesting questions coming up.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of questions, but I think the one main positive that you've got to take straight away is that Kieran Tierney's back at the club, and you're allowed to have these discussions, and you've got the right to have these discussions because he is a Celtic player. That's a great conundrum to have for Celtic next season, the fact to get Kieran Tierney back, who, he ticks a lot of boxes, ticks a lot of the homegrown quota, the club trained quota too. But yeah, I do see a lot of similarities, like you said, with Alistair Johnston in terms of that overlapping. But he can play as an inverted fullback as well. Maybe not to the level that Arsenal wanted him to under Mikel Arteta, because I think that was shown pretty early that he wasn't playing in that role. But just because he can't play it under Mikel Arteta, who is very, very strict about his players being inverted, the likes of Zinchenko, Tomiyasu as well, Lewis Skelly, doesn't mean that he can't do it for Celtic. Not to call him an old dog teaching him new tricks, but he could certainly play inverted if he wanted to. I'm just wondering if that will maybe have an impact on what Celtic do in the transfer window for the other left back that will come into the club, because at the moment I was doing a squad depth piece last week, and it was Kieran Tierney. So he was announced. That was fine. I could change the graphic to say that he was a Celtic player. But below that, Matthew Anderson's out of contract. It looks as if his future will be elsewhere. Mitchell Frame played one game. I think he's had a couple of injuries and we've not seen him since. And then you've got a load of young players in the background as well. So another left back will need to be sorted. So I just wonder if they'll maybe get somebody that's more not more keen, but more, I don't know, used to playing that inverted role. Greg Taylor, for all of his faults, and people did like to mention his faults quite a bit, he was a very good player at playing that inverted role, and he made it his own in those 2-3 years, both under Ange Postecoglou and Brendan Rodgers in his first season in particular. So I just wonder if Celtic will target that position because Tierney will be a more traditional, but at the same time I still think he can play that role. In terms of Nygren, I think the more intelligent players that you have in the team, the better, that can play different roles. If he can play that, that attacking midfield role, and potentially bring in a defensive midfielder that can cover Tierney and Johnson when they bomb forward, then that would be ideal as well. But I think Brendan Rodgers is more fluid than his predecessor, more adaptable than his predecessor in Ange Postecoglou. I'm keen to see how this all pans out with Tierney being back in the team and some of the new signings coming in as well. I think there's going to be not a revolution, but not an evolution. Not a revolution, but an evolution.
Yeah,
always get those two mixed up, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, you got there in the end. I guess the feeling is just that Rodgers might return to something that he was very comfortable with in his first spell. When he arrived at Celtic, he didn't really change too much from what we saw under Ange in terms of shape. And Wazaboy asked here, who's number 10 just now? We don't really have one, and that's kind of the point. We have the closest thing we have to it is Israel Atati, but he plays much deeper, and he's not just given that free license to create. He does he puts in a lot of effort on the other side of the ball as well. And so the thinking might be that if Tierney comes in, Rodgers might return to two more kind of sitting midfielders, one McGregor and someone else, and then allow a single creative central talent to have free license, moving forward in attack. We've not really had an outright number 10, I don't think, since Tom Rogic left the club.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting if Nygren is being earmarked for that role or whether he's been earmarked for a wing role. We don't really know what the makeup of the Celtic midfield, I suppose, will be until the end of the transfer window. I could see, though, Rodgers returning to that kind of, people call it a double pivot, where they have two kind of sitting defensive midfielders. I could see that happening. And I could see it actually being a benefit to the Celtic attack too, especially if you do have Tierney and you do have Alistair Johnston. You will need protection in that transition, especially at the elite level, because we can see how devastating teams can be on the counter-attack.
Yeah, I think we noticed that in particular. I think it was against Aston Villa. Yes, Borussia Dortmund. That was a dreadful night for all concerned. Aston Villa's transition. I think watching them in person, Tony and I were at Villa Park. You've seen the difference in the European level. And Aston Villa aren't even challenging for the league in their domestic, in the Premier League. But you see their transitions and how quick they are, in particular the likes of Ollie Watkins and Morgan Rogers. You're going to be coming up against teams like that every 2-3 games. If you're lucky in the Champions League, you might even get a draw where you're facing all of those teams, it seems like. So for Celtic, I think a defensive midfielder, and I've been talking about this for a couple of years, it's kind of my subject. I think that a defensive midfielder could revolutionise Celtic's midfield. Not that I think that Cal McGregor should be ousted, because he's the captain, he's influential, he does a great job. But I think if you can get somebody defensive minded there, then I think it will help a lot for Celtic in European games and stop those transitions getting to the centre backs. Yes, some of them might break through and then you have to defend, but if you can do your best to stop that, then I think you'll be on to something European wise. But I think it's an interesting summer in the midfield. You've got players that might want to stay. You've got players that might want to leave, that might see that their time at Celtic is over and they might want to try new things. So I think it's definitely an area where we're going to need to keep an eye on and sort of cover, because I think there'll be a bit of movement this summer in terms of ins and outs concerning midfielders.
Quinny saying Nygren will probably cover Kuhn leaving the way things stand at the moment. I do agree with that. As things stand right now, I think that is how it looks on paper, because I think Nygren has played the majority of his football on that right wing, and it does feel the mood music is that Kuhn might end up leaving Celtic this summer, although there's nothing really moving forward too quickly on that. That's just a situation to keep eye of as we move forward into the summer. Yeah, and I just think Tierney's return, it just opens up so many tactical questions, as I say, because Greg Taylor has performed such a unique role for Celtic, I think, over the last few years, that taking him out of the setup does just raise quite. And I take your point that Tierney has, potentially could operate in a more inverted role. I just think Brendan Rodgers is the type of manager, the type of man who always plays a player to his strengths, and doesn't complicate it too much beyond that. So I think he'll, in my opinion, I think he'll just give Tierney license to be that more wide attacking fullback on Celtic's left flank.
And he's a goal threat as well for Tierney when he's playing. Is that traditional? I know with Nicholas Kuhn has been linked with RB Leipzig. I remember in Rodgers' first spell a goal that Kieran Tierney scored from the left back position at Celtic Park against RB Leipzig. So he's got that in his locker as well. I just think these conversations are brilliant because Kieran Tierney's a Celtic player once again, and it's better having him than not having him, and having these conversations where you wouldn't have the capacity or the capability to make these conversations. But this is the time. If Celtic are going to try things, pre-season is going to be the time. Try it against Cork, try it against Sporting Club in the Como Cup, and get it sorted and stick to it for the Champions League qualifiers. Ideally, you want Celtic to be in the best possible position by the time that first leg comes around in the middle of August. They've got their signings in, or they've got the vast majority of their signings in for the summer. I know that might be wishful thinking from my part, but you live in hope and you live in dream. But if they can do that, then they make the qualifier maybe not easier, but it gives them a better chance of progressing if you've got the players in that are going to help you potentially in the league stage, help you in the qualifiers as well. So the more business they do, the better. If they can sort Kieran Tierney's position out, then absolutely brilliant in terms of getting a backup to him as well that can maybe shadow him and learn under him, or even compete against him. But if they get all these things sorted, then I don't see why Celtic can't be successful this season as well, both in Europe and domestically.
McLaughlin, please, saying Rodgers is stuck with the Ange backbone and he's stuck with the formation we were playing when he arrived. Maybe it's time for changes. I think there's an element of truth to that as well. I think as this last season progressed, and Celtic scored a historic amount of goals last season.
Yep.
The best for decades in terms of totals across all competitions. But it did start to feel like maybe freshening things up, maybe a slight alteration here or there, just to keep opposition teams on their toes, basically. And again, I don't think we're saying radical changes need to happen to Celtic's midfield setup or radical changes need to happen to Celtic's attack. It's maybe just moving back to where Rodgers has been comfortable in the past. Because I think, to be fair to Rodgers, he could have came in and tried to change the shape of the team, and he could have come in and tried to change what Ange was doing, but he didn't. And I think that was to his credit, because I think it's certainly what Celtic needed in that first season. Because I think if he tried too much of a transition with the players that are available to him, I'm not quite sure Celtic would have rebounded in that second half of the season in the way they did. So is Rodgers now going to put together his ultimate form of Celtic, so to speak? I guess that's what people are wondering.
That's the hope, yeah, and you would hope that the manager himself sees himself at the club for the long term as well, what he's building. It would seem that early doors the club are backing him with signings, although only one's been announced. There's plenty in the pipeline by all accounts, so they're backing their manager. They're giving him everything that he needs to succeed. I think they're also being a little bit smart in the transfer window with some of the fees that are getting mentioned for players. They've got to use the transfer market to their advantage, because I think there's more pressing areas than where they're targeting at the moment. So if they save a little bit in those areas, then it means that you can put real money and real firepower behind the positions that maybe need it more. As much as I do think that Celtic do need wing players and attackers, bringing in potentially a midfield or another centre back, they could be more expensive for the club this summer, especially with the way the window transpires. So if they've saved that money and they've got it to play with, then they're in a good position to bring in those players that will maybe cost a little bit more. So bringing in Nygren for potentially 1.7 million, it will be a cheaper price for Balikwisha if he comes through the door, because he's on the last year of his deal, and I think there's an understanding between the club and the player that he wants to move on to a new challenge. Compensation fees for Callum Osmond, who we believe will get maybe announced in the next couple of days, although we haven't heard too much one way or the other. You've got players for the future and Isaac English. So I think they've been quite smart in the transfer window at the moment, bringing Kieran Tierney back in a free transfer as well, of course. maybe I think they're just assessing it, seeing what bargains they can get now, and then going out and scouting maybe more expensive players later on in the window for positions that truly need it.
We know that Celtic have money. I mean, that's not in doubt.
Absolutely.
And then I know that, Celtic's transfer business over the last few years, it's run on what people call a net profit, despite some of the signings that have been made for big money. Celtic have largely made money on signings over the last few years. I guess it's not really about how much money you spend, it's about the way you spend it. But we know that Celtic have the clout and the resources to throw their weight around to an extent, over the next couple of months. I don't think that's in doubt. And the club aren't afraid to spend money either, because they spent big money on Arne Engels, they spent big money on Adam Ida, and whether you think those fees were inflated or not, sometimes that's what it takes to get players over the line of quality who you want to take your squad forward. And I think Celtic will need to do that again, and arguably do it, at a higher level than they have in recent years. This could be another summer where Celtic break their transfer record again. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
Yeah, inflation is very, very real in the footballing world, just as well as it is in real life as well. Of course, football is real life, but you know what I mean in terms of football transfer fees. What I would say about the players that joined last summer as well, specifically, I would look at the midfielders and Paulo Bernardo and Arne Engels. They both had disrupted pre-seasons, so they didn't get fully up to speed with Celtic until later on. They were doing their preparation. I think the Bundesliga season had already started by the time Arne Engels came to Celtic, so he was fitness-wise there, but maybe wasn't integrated as well as other players were that came earlier on in the window. What I would say about these players is that these players are young and they will improve. I've got no doubt whatsoever. I'm willing to put my neck on the line with Arne Engels that I think he'll have a really good season this season, because I think he'll be settled, he'll understand the rigours of playing for Celtic and how much it takes its toll on the body and the mind as well. So the fact that he's had that season, he was Brendan Rodgers is quick to say it's not a holiday anymore. He told Arne Engels it's not going to be a holiday anymore at Celtic. You'll be playing twice, 3 times a week. I think he'll be used to it now, and I think you'll see a different player. It takes players sometimes longer than others to integrate into it, and despite that, Engels' numbers were on the whole quite good last season. He was impacting, maybe not so much on games for 90 minutes, but you look at the goals and assists, he was there, and he did have a couple of standout performances in there too. I just think that next season, in the case of at least Paulo Bernardo and Arne Engels, I think both of them you'll see improved performances because they're settled, they know where they're going to be, and not that they'll be veterans, but they'll be used to what's expected of them at Celtic over a summer period, and they'll be ready for the season when it comes around.
Yep, so in summary today, if you're just joining us or you're joining us late, or just to recap, Benjamin Nygren to Celtic looks like it's going to go ahead. Celtic have agreed a fee, £1.7 million is the fee quoted. So it looks like that will be done over the next few days, fingers crossed. And we've been discussing Kieran Tierney's return and just kind of what the tactical impact of that will be. And I think Nygren does fit into that to an extent, because even though Tierney plays on the left, it will have a knock-on effects to the central areas and to the right side as well, as Rodgers considers the balance of the team. Ryan, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll be chatting through all the reaction to the fixtures, of course. So anything that you're just looking for the first derby dates of the season? Is that what you're initially looking for those fixtures?
I think so, but you also look at some of the big games out with the Glasgow derby, and there are big games for Celtic. The first game at Pittodrie, first game at Tynecastle. I just look forward to the whole thing, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't looking for the Glasgow derby dates. I think that's what we all do. You all look when you're playing against your biggest rivals. I think that's normal. Both as somebody who covers the club and who follows the club as well. I think that's what I'll be looking at. But I'll be looking at the whole thing as well. So all on the Celtic way, of course.
And if you want to look at Alan Morrison's article on the Kieran Tierney return and all the tactical implications of that, then go to celticway.co.uk. It should be the article in the top slot. Interesting read as always from Alan, so well worth a read if you've been interested in what we've been talking about today. As I say, we'll be back tomorrow with more Celtic chat, but until then, thanks for joining us in the live chat, thanks for joining us in the comments if you are, and we'll see you again on Friday morning. Goodbye.